One of the challenges for the Western Journal as we seek to report on truth to you, not speculation, one of the challenges has been kind of teasing out what of these allegations are true, which of them aren't, or maybe said otherwise, which of them are clearly not true.
Yeah.
There's been a whole lot of misinformation floating around out there. And that has been a struggle for us as we've tried to sift through all of this and bring you all information that's true. And that's probably been frustrating to some readers over at the Western Journal. And it may have frustrated some of you guys who are watching us right now because we haven't hit any of these allegations really out of the park yet because we're still trying to figure out what's what. Well, good news, fellas. We've got lawsuits now. So lawsuits are being filed across the country. We have now gotten our hands on some of those. And I want to just read you some excerpts from some of the affidavits from people who have basically functioned as whistleblowers. These were poll watchers. These were people who were there to make sure that what the administrators counting the ballots, that what they were doing was right and that they abided by the rules. Yeah. And now we have case after case of people coming forward. And what I'm going to talk about specifically in Michigan, we're seeing other stuff, though, in Pennsylvania and other places. And also late breaking news, in case you have not seen it yet, the Decision Desk HQ has called North Carolina for President Trump. So that's a big deal, too. Without North Carolina, his path forward, I think, would be non-existent. So the path forward is still there, and a lot's going to depend on what happens with these lawsuits. So I want to read, if you folks will be patient with me, we've got, you can't see it because the white balance is off, but we have the actual suit filings here. And this is against the City of Detroit and the Detroit Election Commission and the Wayne County Board of Canvassers. And I'm going to read you just a summary of the allegations of fraud here, and then we're going to get into some specifics, some specific things that poll watchers said, and I want to get you guys to respond to them, because this may be the first, while you've heard about all these allegations of fraud floating around, this may be the first time you've ever heard them enumerated. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to read for just a moment. The defendants systematically process. Now, when we talk about the defendants, we're talking about the election commission. We're talking about the guys who are counting, the guys who are accused of conducting fraud. The defendants systematically processed and counted ballots from voters whose name failed to appear in either the qualified voter file, that's who can vote, or in the supplemental sheets, that's who can vote but isn't in the other file. When a voter's name could not be found, the election worker assigned the ballot to a random name already in the QVF to a person who had not voted. So a ballot comes in, it's not identifiable, they take it. The allegation is that poll workers took it and assigned it to somebody who had not voted yet. So basically they just used someone else's vote to cast this vote. Defendants instructed election workers to not verify signatures on absentee ballots, to backdate absentee ballots, and to process such ballots regardless of their validity. After election officials announced the last absentee ballots had been received, another batch of unsecured and unsealed ballots without envelopes arrived in trays at the counting center. This is the only counting center in Wayne County, by the way. There were tens of thousands of these absentee ballots, and apparently every ballot was counted and attributed only to Democratic candidates. Again, we're reading from the lawsuit filed against the Election Commission in Detroit. Defendants instructed election workers to process ballots that appeared after the election deadline and to falsely report that those ballots had been received prior to the November 3rd, 2020 deadline. That's fraud. Defendants systematically used false information to process ballots, such as using incorrect or false birthdays. Many times the election workers inserted new names into the qualified voter file after the election and recorded these new voters as having a birth date of, you guessed it, 1/1/1900. We've seen January 1st, 1900 pop up for days and days. People trying to figure out why did so many people appear to have, so many 120-year-olds appear to have voted. Well, this would explain that.
Yeah.
And quickly, just a couple more. Unsecured ballots arrived at the counting center loading garage, not in sealed ballot boxes, and without any chain of custody and without envelopes. Defendant election officials and workers refused to record challenges to their process and removed challengers from the site if they politely voiced a challenge. After poll challengers started discovering the fraud taking place, defendant election officials and workers locked credentialed challengers out of the counting room so they could not observe the process, during which time tens of thousands of ballots were processed. Defendant election officials and workers allowed ballots to be duplicated by hand without allowing poll challengers to check if the duplication was accurate. In fact, election officials and workers repeatedly obstructed poll challengers from observing. Defendants permitted thousands of ballots to be filled out by hand and duplicated on site without oversight from poll challengers. Now, this actually gets comical as we go on, and I won't get into some of the nitty-gritty of this because I want to ask you guys some questions, but it actually gets to the point where poll challengers were trying to get a closer look at the books and the computer monitors, and were told by the election officials they were too close because of COVID. So the challenger would back off a little bit, but wouldn't back all the way off. The official would then go get a supervisor to come in. The supervisor would tell the challenger, you got to back off. And in one case, the supervisor sat down about 3 feet away from the official and continued helping and told the other guy he had to be 6 feet away or farther. They ended up booting these, allegedly ended up booting these challengers and actually locking them out. And then, of course, that's when the cardboard and those things went up around the windows. So I want to just quickly do a little lightning round with you guys. I want to ask you, I'm going to read you specific instances of these, and I'm going to ask you what you think. These are from the affidavits. These are from poll challengers and people who were working the polls and their specific stories, and I just want to get your take on. On November 4th, remember this is the day after election. Yep. On November 4th, a City of Detroit election worker was instructed to improperly predate the absentee ballots receive date that were not in the QVF as if they had been received on or before November 3rd. She was told to alter the information in the voter file to falsely show that the absentee ballots had been received in time to be valid. She estimates that this was done to thousands of ballots. Is that concerning or not?
I think that's incredibly concerning, particularly because we have the fact that in most of these states, and I want to say all 50 states, we have a system by which late arriving ballots can be cured. Whether you believe in that or not, that's up to you. But you can have these things verified. You can just count them separately and ensure that they are segregated from the typical ballots cast and await those results and essentially the responses from the folks who cast those ballots to see if they're valid and then add them to the totals later. And I think part of the rush to get this expedited and to ensure that all of these thousands and thousands of late ballots or mailed ballots, absentee ballots, whatever group these fall into, to get them counted on election night, the mess that this has caused, all the mail-in ballots, to rush and count them has actually resulted in not wanting to go through the proper channels to make sure that the count is valid.
Right, because why would you? If you've messed up, then it's in your incentive to keep things in the dark. What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, we need a deadline on when these votes come in, and it sucks if you've done everything right.
Well, there is one.
Yeah.
There is a deadline.
Well, that's apparently not for some of these people, I guess, is what I'm saying. But, a lot of people might think, well, some of these ballots, they just came in just barely a little bit late, so you should give them a break. But, if we keep pushing back on these restrictions, we're going to get to the point where, okay, one candidate's winning at the end of election night, that a bunch of other people put in their late ballots. All of a sudden it switches. We just can't have that in a fair and safe election.
Let me ask you another one. At approximately, again, this is pulling from signed affidavits from people who were poll challengers. They were there watching, trying to make sure everything was legit. At approximately 4 a.m. on November 4th, again, election night was November 3rd, so we're into the next morning, wee hours of the morning. At approximately 4 a.m. on November 4th, tens of thousands of ballots were suddenly brought into the counting room through the back door. These ballots were brought to the counting center by vehicles with out-of-state license plates. It was observed that all these new ballots were cast for Joe Biden. If somebody said that to you, would you think, okay, this is an allegation of fraud. This probably needs to be looked into?
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. And, now that we're talking in the tens of thousands of ballots, this is the kind of stuff that swings the election for Trump. And we're seeing more and more cases where, look, we don't have definitive evidence or definitive proof that
Not yet.
a lot of this stuff happened.
Not yet. We have
But
allegations. We have affidavits. We
Yes.
have people swearing that this is what happened.
it's starting to stack up. And if
It's
this,
not nothing. Yeah.
It's not nothing.
It's not. It's this. It's this. If you can't see, it's
Exhibit-
Exhibit A. It's Exhibit B. It's Exhibit C. It's Exhibit D. Now remember, all this time we're being told there are no
There's no such
legitimate. There are no legitimate allegations. It's Exhibit E.
Yeah.
Hey, look at this. There's an F. Exhibit F.
There's obviously evidence that something could be going on, and that, we shouldn't be denigrating anyone that notices that
Yes.
Yes.
and wants to investigate it.
Yeah.
All right. Good answer. Another quick one. I'm going to give this to you, Andrew. Despite election rules that required that all absentee ballots be inputted into the system before 9 p.m. on election night, the election workers inputted all of these new ballots into the system and manually added each voter to the list after 9 p.m. Listen to this. The qualified voter form system can be accessed and edited by any election processor, that's any election employee who has credentials, with proper credentials in the state of Michigan at any time and from any location with internet access. This access permits anyone with the proper credentials to edit when ballots were sent, received, and processed, again from any location with an internet connection. Am I the only one who's worried about that, who's disturbed? We have no idea who
Absolutely
all
not.
has credentials. We have no idea where they were logged in from.
No, absolutely not. I think that's actually the one that, first of all, I'm most likely to believe of all the allegations. That's the one that I would say is the most likely of all realities. And that is the one that worries me the most, because that means that off-site folks who weren't working that day, that means that folks who haven't gone into work in weeks, who are on vacation or doing whatever it is, can go and backdate certain folks or add people to the rolls. Again, like you were saying, there's not only should there be a date by which things need to be received and a time by which they need to be received, you need to be registered to vote. It's not that challenging to file very quickly with your county and make sure that you are on the rolls to vote. And if you are a resident and a citizen with the most simple types of documentation, you can get your voter registration done. It's not very hard. A lot of our audience has done it. I am sure that they feel the exact same way. And so that is the one that scares me the most, because I'm not so much worried about things that happened on site at the moment of, because there are the poll watchers and there are those things are going to get raised. If I were an intelligent criminal, I would think to do something on the back end afterwards when no one's looking.
Yeah.
Well, and
Right?
how do you not have a system that requires multiple people to sign off before someone's vote is changed? You just give somebody a set of credentials and they can go in and presumably do this on their own. Now, maybe there are a million different security checks in place. We're not hearing that that's the case. And sort of knowing government operations, I kind of doubt if that's the case. Did you quickly have one more thing you were wanting to say, or no?
You
It looked like you were wanting to.
requiring people, just another note, requiring people to get an ID to vote is not voter suppression.
No.
So
No, you have to have
lot of people
you
argue
have
for
to
that,
have an
but-
ID to get into the Democrat National Convention
Yeah.
every 4 years. So it doesn't seem unreasonable. There's a great video we ought to go back and find it sometime. It's a video where somebody went into neighborhoods where voter suppression is frequently alleged, and asked. Most of them were black voters, and asked them, do you know how to get a driver's license? Do you know how to get an ID?
DMV,
Do you need any help getting a driver's license or getting an ID? And they were offended. They were offended.
Yeah.
They said, no, of course I know how to do this. I'm
Yeah.
not an idiot.